Evan sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen. A sudden ping broke the silence, his heart skipping a beat. It was an email, subject line, confidential, immediate action required. He clicked it open, and his eyes widened. There on the screen was a damning email chain, direct orders from the CEO himself, detailing fraudulent activity within the company. A surge of panic hit him. This was it. This was the proof he'd been searching for. He sat frozen, his fingers trembling over the keyboard. Just as he was about to gather his thoughts, the lights above flickered, casting a momentary shadow over his screen. He didn't know whether to run or confront the truth. Every instinct screamed to delete the email, to wipe away any trace. But his conscience wouldn't let him. The room felt smaller, suffocating, and in that instant, the weight of the decision hit him. If he acted, he would be the one to expose it all. But if he stayed silent, nothing would change. As the screen blinked again, Evan knew that whatever path he chose, it would alter his life forever. A knock at the door snapped him back to reality. It was his supervisor, Charlotte, standing with a forced smile. Her expression was unreadable, but Evan could feel the tension in the air. The email had been seen. The game had just changed. Evan's pulse quickened as the elevator descended. Charlotte stood next to him, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The silence was suffocating. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His mind raced with the email's contents, each line repeating in his head like an endless loop. Was this a test? Would he be forced into silence, or would he take the plunge? He had always prided himself on doing the right thing, but the stakes had never been so high. As the elevator descended, the soft hum of the machinery only seemed to amplify the gnawing in his stomach. His eyes darted toward Charlotte, who stood unfazed, a slight smile playing on her lips as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The door opened with a soft ding, and Charlotte stepped out first. Evan followed, his mind heavy with the decision before him. Every step he took felt like he was walking deeper into a trap he couldn't escape. The corporate world, so pristine and structured, now felt like a cage. As he moved through the sleek lobby, the weight of the email still hung over him, like a shadow following his every step. This was no longer just about the company's secrets. It was about his own survival. His reputation, his career, even his future, now seemed in jeopardy. Charlotte turned and gave him a nod, but her eyes held something more. An unspoken understanding that only made Evan's chest tighten further. The lobby was quiet, save for the distant sound of phones ringing and soft footsteps echoing off the polished marble floors. Evan's eyes scanned the room, avoiding the few employees scattered around. He could feel their indifference, everyone too consumed by their own lives to notice the storm he was walking through. Charlotte, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, her steps measured and purposeful as she walked toward the glass doors leading to the parking garage. He followed her, each step a reminder of how little control he had over what was happening. When they reached the doors, Charlotte turned to him, her face softening for the first time since the elevator ride. "Evan, don't overthink this," she said, her voice smooth, almost coaxing. "You've been with us for years. This is your chance to advance. All you need to do is follow through." Her words hung in the air like a delicate thread, both tempting and terrifying. Evan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. Could he really trust her? He knew the risks, knew the potential consequences. But the offer was there, dangling in front of him like a carrot. He was torn. His loyalty to the company had always been unwavering, but now he questioned everything. The line between right and wrong was blurred, and the weight of his decision felt heavier with every passing second. "Just think about it," Charlotte added, before turning and walking toward the parking lot. Evan stood frozen, his thoughts a storm of doubt and fear. Evan barely slept that night. The dark room seemed to close in around him, each passing hour heightening the tension in his chest. The offer had been clear: destroy the evidence, keep his job, and climb the corporate ladder. But Evan knew the cost. The email was the truth, raw and unfiltered. If he destroyed it, he'd be complicit in the company's corruption. But if he exposed it, he risked everything: his job, his career, his reputation. And there was more. Charlotte had made it clear that the higher-ups were watching him, waiting for him to decide. They already knew he had seen the email. They were testing him, seeing if he would bend to their will. Evan ran his fingers through his hair, his mind a whirlwind. The truth was a dangerous thing, one that could ruin lives, his, and those of the people around him. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping him from his thoughts. It was an email from Charlotte. "Let me know what you decide. This is your moment, Evan." He stared at the screen, the words echoing in his head. It was as though she had reached through the phone and wrapped her fingers around his throat. The pressure was unbearable. He had always thought he could handle the truth, but now it felt like the truth was the one thing that could destroy him. The morning came too quickly. Evan barely had time to process the weight of the decision before he found himself in the office again. The fluorescent lights above hummed as he walked through the sterile hallways, his footsteps echoing like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. He hadn't replied to Charlotte's email, but he couldn't avoid the inevitable. The moment he stepped into the office, the world felt different. Every face, every sound, even the air itself felt alien. He wasn't just another employee anymore. He was a target. As he made his way to his desk, his colleague, Karen, gave him a brief smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew something was off, but she didn't dare ask. Evan sat down at his desk, feeling the weight of the chair beneath him. He turned on his computer, his fingers shaking as he prepared to log in. The screen flashed to life, and there it was, the email, sitting in his inbox, waiting for him. It was the one thing that could change everything, the one thing he couldn't undo. As he stared at it, the decision loomed over him like a storm cloud. Would he betray everything he believed in, or would he make the hardest choice of his life? The clock was ticking. Evan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the mug of coffee that had gone cold. The night's sleepless hours weighed on him, dark circles under his eyes. He thought about his daughter, Sarah, and how she had smiled when she asked if he'd be home for dinner. He thought about his wife, Anna, who carried the weight of their mortgage, the bills, and the unspoken hope that Evan's steady job would hold their world together. His mind replayed Charlotte's words like a broken record. The promotion dangled before him was tempting, money they desperately needed, but at what cost? He felt like two versions of himself were at war. One wanted to bury the truth and keep his family safe, while the other couldn't stomach the thought of living with that guilt. The clock on the wall ticked with ruthless precision, a reminder that time was running out. Anna entered the kitchen, her eyes heavy with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. Evan forced a tired smile, but his silence spoke louder. She knew something was wrong. She always did. He wanted to tell her everything, but the words lodged in his throat. How could he admit that the very job keeping them afloat might also destroy them? Anna sat across from him now, her hands clasped around her own coffee cup, watching him in silence. She didn't push, she rarely did, but her eyes demanded honesty. Evan wanted to tell her, but fear gnawed at him. If she knew, she'd carry the same weight, and he couldn't bear that. "You're not yourself," she finally whispered, her voice breaking the quiet. Evan rubbed his temples, exhaling slowly. "Work's been complicated," he muttered. Anna gave a half smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She leaned forward, touching his hand. "You've always done the right thing," she said softly. Her words cut deeper than she knew. They weren't reassurance, they were expectation. He felt the crushing responsibility in her gaze, in her faith in him. He squeezed her hand lightly, forcing a nod. Inside, his thoughts screamed. He was about to break the trust of the one person who believed in him most, no matter which path he chose. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls inching closer. He looked at Anna's hand in his, warm and steady, and he wondered if she'd still hold it if she knew the truth. Later that evening, Evan sat in his daughter Sarah's room, watching her line up her stuffed animals before bed. She was only 8, her world still pure and untouched by the shadows that consumed him. She looked up at him with bright eyes and asked, "Daddy, are you going to be at my recital this week?" The question was simple, innocent, but it pierced him. What if he wasn't? What if this storm swallowed him whole before then? He forced a smile, ruffling her hair. "Of course I will," he said, his voice steady but his heart breaking. Sarah giggled and hugged him tight, the kind of hug that makes the world feel safe. But he knew it wasn't safe. He kissed her forehead, tucking her in, and as she drifted into sleep, he sat there a moment longer. He watched her chest rise and fall, each breath reminding him of why he couldn't give in. The company's corruption wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was a poison that spread into families, into futures. And if he stayed silent, it wouldn't just be his conscience at stake, it would be hers too. The next day, Evan sat in his car outside a quiet cafe downtown. He had agreed to meet Daniel, an old college friend turned investigative journalist. The weight of that decision sat heavy on his chest. He hadn't told Anna, hadn't told anyone. Daniel arrived with his usual sharpness, his eyes scanning the parking lot before sliding into the passenger seat. "You wouldn't have called me unless it was serious," Daniel said, his voice low. Evan nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "I found something," he whispered, his voice trembling. Daniel leaned closer, his expression sharpening. "How big?" he asked. Evan swallowed hard. "Big enough to ruin careers. Maybe worse." Silence hung heavy between them. Daniel's eyes lit with curiosity, but Evan felt exposed, like he had just crossed an invisible line. The evidence was dangerous, and sharing even a hint of it was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. "I can't promise safety," Daniel warned. Evan knew that already. Safety had been gone the moment he opened that email. That night, Evan sat alone in his study, the blinds drawn tight, the room lit only by the soft glow of his desk lamp. He replayed the conversation with Daniel, each word like an echo he couldn't silence. He had taken the first step, but there was no going back now. The choice weighed on him like an anchor. His family's faces swirled in his mind, Anna's quiet strength, Sarah's innocent smile. They were his anchor, but they were also his vulnerability. If the company found out he was talking, it wouldn't just be him they came after. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the shadows dancing above him. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself, his voice hoarse. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath him. Every second of silence from the company felt like a test. Every glance from Charlotte felt like a warning. He opened his laptop, staring at the encrypted folder, holding the email. His hand hovered over the mouse, frozen in indecision. The evidence was there, undeniable, but using it meant stepping into a firestorm he might never escape. Evan walked into the office with a sinking feeling, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights heavier than ever. He noticed the subtle changes, his colleagues' eyes shifting away, conversations halting when he approached. The air was different, thick with suspicion. Tar had called for a mandatory compliance meeting later that afternoon, but the message was clear. He was being watched. His heart pounded as he slid into his chair, the email still haunting his inbox. Every keystroke sounded louder, each click a reminder of the evidence he still held. He wondered who had seen it, who had whispered his name in hushed tones. Charlotte passed by his desk, her heels clicking with precision, offering a smile that carried no warmth. Evan forced himself to return the gesture, but his hands trembled beneath the desk. His phone buzzed. Another message from Daniel. "We need to meet again. Things are moving fast." Evan swallowed hard, feeling the walls close in. The company's power wasn't just in documents or numbers. It was in silence, in fear, in the way every person seemed to know but say nothing. He realized then that he wasn't just fighting for truth. He was fighting against a machine designed to crush dissent before it even had a voice. The compliance meeting was a charade. Evan sat at the long glass table surrounded by HR representatives and managers. Their words were polished, carefully scripted, dripping with corporate charm. "We value integrity," one said, smiling too wide. "Transparency keeps us strong," another added, their tone rehearsed. Evan's chest tightened with each hollow phrase. He knew what they were doing. They weren't reminding employees of ethics. They were reminding him that the company decided what integrity meant. Charlotte sat at the head of the table, her eyes occasionally locking with his, her expression calm but predatory. Evan scribbled notes to distract himself, but his mind roared with anger. They wanted obedience dressed as loyalty, silence masked as professionalism. When the meeting ended, Charlotte approached him with a soft voice. "I trust you understand where we stand, Evan," she said. He nodded, forcing composure, though inside he wanted to shout. The machine wasn't subtle anymore. It was pressing down on him, testing his breaking point. Back at his desk, Evan felt the shift in the atmosphere more intensely. Karen, his colleague, approached cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful," she murmured, sliding a file onto his desk. Her eyes darted around nervously before walking away. Evan opened the folder. Irregular expense reports, mismatched figures, sloppy cover-ups hiding in plain sight. His stomach dropped. The evidence was piling up, but so was the danger. He glanced across the office at Karen, who avoided his gaze, her shoulders stiff with fear. The betrayal of silence was louder than words. He realized she knew more, but was unwilling to risk herself. Evan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of isolation pressing harder than ever. Every shred of truth he uncovered tightened the noose around him. By evening, Evan couldn't contain it anymore. He cornered Karen near the vending machines, the hum of the machine filling the silence between them. "Why give me this?" he demanded in a hushed tone. Karen's eyes flicked nervously toward the cameras mounted above. "Because you need to see what you're up against," she whispered. Her voice cracked with fear. "But don't involve me. I can't afford to lose this job." Evan's frustration boiled over, but he kept his voice low. "You know this is wrong." Karen shook her head, backing away. "Right and wrong don't pay the bills," she muttered before leaving him standing alone. Evan clenched his fists, the words cutting deep. The betrayal wasn't just from the company anymore. It was from those too afraid to fight, leaving him to carry the burden alone. Later that night, Evan was summoned to Charlotte's office. The room was sleek, polished, every surface gleaming under soft recessed lighting. She motioned for him to sit, her smile calm, almost kind. "You've been under a lot of pressure," she said smoothly, pouring 2 glasses of water. "But you're smart. You know how this works." Evan sat stiffly, his pulse quickening. Charlotte leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. "Destroy what you saw, and there's a promotion waiting for you. Better pay, more security for your family. No one needs to know." The words hit him like a blow. The offer was explicit now, the trap undeniable. He looked into her eyes, seeing not kindness but calculation. She was testing him, waiting to see if fear or ambition would win. His throat was dry, but he managed to whisper, "And if I don't?" Charlotte's smile faded, her eyes hardening. "Then I can't protect you, Evan." The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken threat. The following morning, Evan walked into the office and immediately felt something was wrong. His access badge flickered red at the turnstile before finally granting entry. A chill ran down his spine. Whispers followed him down the hall, colleagues averting their eyes as though his presence carried contagion. When he sat at his desk, a shock awaited. His encrypted folder was gone. The files he had guarded so carefully were wiped clean, replaced with a single message: "We know." His stomach dropped. He turned, scanning the room, but no one met his gaze. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. Someone had gone into his system. Someone he trusted. Karen approached, her face pale, her eyes avoiding his. "Evan, we need to talk," she whispered. Her tone was heavy with guilt, and in that moment he knew. The ally he had clung to was the very knife in his back. His chest tightened as the reality sank in. She had betrayed him, and the company now had everything. Evan followed Karen into a quiet conference room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. She closed the door behind them, her hands trembling. "I didn't have a choice," she blurted, her voice breaking. Evan's jaw clenched as he stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "You gave them everything." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "They threatened me. My job, my family. I couldn't risk it." Her words sliced through him. The one person he thought stood by him had chosen survival over loyalty. Evan wanted to scream, to shatter the glass walls around them, but all he could do was stare at her, his chest heaving. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked, his voice shaking. Karen avoided his gaze, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Evan," she whispered. But sorry wasn't enough. The trust was broken, the fight shifted, and now he was truly alone. By midday, the trap revealed itself further. Evan received a call from Daniel, his voice urgent. "The files you shared, something's off. They don't match your notes." Evan's blood ran cold. He opened his copies, scrolling frantically. The documents were altered, numbers rearranged, signatures forged. The evidence he thought was solid had been poisoned, transformed into a weapon against him. His breath caught in his throat as realization dawned. The company had set him up. If he went public now, they would discredit him, painting him as incompetent or malicious. Panic swirled into anger, his pulse pounding. "They're framing me," he muttered, gripping the phone tighter. Daniel's voice was grim. "You need to be careful. They're not just covering tracks, they're making you the scapegoat." Evan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the walls seemed to collapse around him. Every step he had taken toward truth had been calculated, predicted, and twisted into a trap. Hours later, Evan was summoned to an executive meeting. The boardroom gleamed with polished wood and steel, the skyline stretching behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Charlotte sat at the head of the table, flanked by senior executives, her expression calm, commanding. Evan entered cautiously, the weight of every eye on him. Charlotte's voice was smooth as silk. "Evan, we're concerned about your recent behavior." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the doctored files, damning evidence pointing to him as the source of misconduct. His chest constricted as realization hit. They weren't just silencing him. They were building a case against him. His throat tightened, but he forced his voice steady. "This isn't mine. You know it." Charlotte's lips curled into a faint smile. "Perception is reality, Evan. And right now, the perception is not in your favor." The executive's silence was louder than accusations, their eyes cold, complicit. The company had flipped the script. When Evan left the boardroom, his legs felt like lead, each step echoing with dread. The truth had never been further out of reach. He had entered this fight, thinking evidence was his weapon, but now it was a cage, twisted against him. Karen's betrayal, Charlotte's manipulation, the executive's silence, it all closed in like walls pressing tighter. He stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone, desperate to hear Daniel's voice again. But as he raised it, the screen lit up with a chilling message: "Stop digging or lose everything." His throat closed, his breath shallow. The company wasn't bluffing anymore. They had turned his world upside down, and now survival wasn't about career or reputation. It was about his life, his family, and the fragile thread of hope he still clung to. The twist was clear. He wasn't exposing corruption anymore. He was the one on trial. Evan sat alone in his car outside the courthouse, the engine off, the cold air creeping through the cracked window. He stared at the building's towering structure, a symbol of justice he no longer believed in. The file was in his lap, the evidence he had risked everything for. The weight of the decision pressed harder than ever. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Daniel. "They're coming for you, Evan," Daniel's voice warned. "You need to move now." Evan's hand trembled as he grabbed the phone, his breath shallow. "I'm not backing down," Evan replied, his voice hoarse, determined. He had spent weeks running, hiding, trying to protect his family, but he knew this was it. There would be no turning back after today. His fingers clenched around the file, and he felt the heat of resolve burning in his chest. The truth had cost him his job, his friends, his dignity. But now, the truth would cost him everything. He opened the car door, his feet meeting the cold concrete, as he took a step toward the looming courthouse. Each step felt heavier, but with each one, a new sense of defiance surged within him. He wasn't going to run anymore. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Evan walked through the cold, sterile hallways, his footsteps echoing, the buzz of voices a distant hum in the background. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the courtroom. The door opened slowly, and the scene inside hit him like a punch. Charlotte sat at the front, her composed expression in stark contrast to his racing thoughts. The judge's gavel struck, and the trial began. The stakes were higher than ever now. They weren't just questioning his job, they were questioning his very character. His hand shook as he placed the folder onto the table in front of him. The weight of the moment was crushing. The media was watching. His family was waiting. Evan took a deep breath, his fingers curling around the file. "I'm ready," he whispered to himself, though it sounded more like a question. The doors behind him closed, sealing him in. There was no more running. It was time to face the consequences. The first question came from the opposing lawyer. "Mr. Evans, do you deny the evidence against you?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. Evan opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. Charlotte's team had already built their case. They had manipulated the documents, twisted the facts, and now it was his word against theirs. He knew the truth, but truth didn't always win in a courtroom. He could feel the weight of the room closing in on him. The media cameras flashed, capturing every moment. He was trapped in the spotlight, but not for the reason he had hoped. The pressure was unbearable. Every eye in the room was on him. Every breath felt like a weight. He had to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the pounding in his ears. "I didn't," he started, but Charlotte's lawyer interrupted, spinning the narrative once again. The moment felt endless, the words slipping from his grasp. His mind raced for something to grasp onto, but nothing came. Evan's mind was a blur of fragmented thoughts and fear. He hadn't prepared for this moment. He hadn't prepared for Charlotte's cold smile, the way she seemed to know every move he would make before he made it. He had been cornered from the beginning. The words coming from his mouth felt hollow, rehearsed, but they weren't enough. Charlotte's smile never faltered as she stood to cross-examine him. "Mr. Evans," she began, "you claim innocence, but how do you explain the discrepancies in your reports?" The room seemed to close in on him, and his throat tightened. "I didn't do this," he insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. The judge raised an eyebrow, and the jury's eyes were locked on him, judgment already forming. The weight of the entire room pressed down on him. He could feel the walls closing in, his every word dissected, his every move scrutinized. It was a game he hadn't been prepared to play. And yet, as Charlotte's piercing gaze met his, he realized it wasn't just about the trial anymore. It was about survival. The final argument was made, and the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Evan sat back down, his hands still shaking, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had told the truth, but now he wasn't sure if it was enough. The judge stood, and the room rose to its feet in anticipation. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as the decision hung in the air. Evan's thoughts raced, replaying every moment, every decision, wondering where he had gone wrong. He thought of Anna, Sarah. Would they still be proud of him? Could they survive the fallout? The judge's voice rang out, clear and final. "We have reached a verdict." Evan's heart thudded in his chest, the room going silent. This was it. His fate, his family's fate, was about to be decided. The courtroom held its breath as the judge continued, but Evan's world narrowed to a single heartbeat racing second. Evan walked out of the courthouse, feeling like a ghost. The media cameras flashed, but he couldn't face the questions. His phone buzzed with Anna's name, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. The truth had come at a cost, his job, his reputation, everything. He stood still, disconnected from the world, unsure how to face the future. At home, Evan entered to find Anna sitting in the dimly lit living room. "I heard the verdict," she said, her voice calm but distant. He apologized, but the distance between them had never felt greater. "What now?" she asked. "We rebuild," he replied, though unsure how. Weeks passed and life felt harder. The calls for job opportunities stopped, and Evan was forced to take odd jobs. Anna tried to support him, but the strain was visible. One night, Anna sat beside him with tea, and for the first time in weeks, Evan believed that they could rebuild. Months later, Evan started a new job. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the courthouse, and although the past lingered, hope flickered in his heart. He was rebuilding, not just his career, but his life. Evan stood at the door watching the sunset, feeling peace for the first time in months. Anna and Sarah were inside, their laughter reaching him. The truth had cost him everything, but it had also given him new perspective. He was ready to rebuild, not just his career, but his life. Months after the trial, Evan stood outside the courthouse, a sense of quiet resolution settling over him. The case had closed, and though the public never fully knew the truth, he felt at peace. His phone buzzed. "It's over. You did the right thing." He looked down the steps at the bustling street below, ready to move forward, knowing he had done what was right, despite the cost. Walking through the office, Evan passed Charlotte's door, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. There was no need for words. Both knew their fight was over. Evan walked past, no longer afraid of the power that once held him captive. At home, Evan sat with Anna, Sarah's laughter in the background. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know," Evan replied, his voice soft. "But we'll rebuild." For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope as they sat together in silence. Months later, Evan stood in front of a new office building, ready for a fresh start. He had learned that even when the world tries to break you, you can still stand tall. Today was the first step in rebuilding his life. As the sun set, Evan stood on the porch, watching the sky change colors. Inside, Anna and Sarah laughed together. Evan had fought the battle, and while the road ahead was uncertain, he felt peace.